Good evening. This is Brandon Kibbe, Chairman of the Open Space Committee, Ad Hoc Committee, and calling our Open Space Ad Hoc Committee meeting to order on Tuesday, October 13th, 2020 at 6:04 p.m. In accordance with the requirements of the open meeting law, please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast over Lunenburg Public Access. The town of Lunenburg, in response to the COVID-19 coronavirus, is currently following the guidance of the Lunenburg Board of Health, Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and the CDC regarding the virus and steps communities can take to prevent the spread and allow all town facilities are open by appointment only outside the open hours of 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. In accordance with the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, all public meetings are being conducted remotely. This meeting will be broadcast through local cable access on Facebook Live on the Public Access Facebook page and will be able to be found on Lunenburg Access YouTube channel within 24 hours after the meeting. The following information is also provided for members of the public that would like to participate in the meeting remotely. To participate remotely from a computer, please use the link below to join the public meeting webinar, https://us02web.zoom.us/j/85154552907, or from a telephone, dial the toll-free number 888-475-4499 and enter meeting ID 8515-455-2907. If you have not registered with Zoom, you will be asked for your name and an email address. Note that no participant ID is needed. Just press pound when asked. Telephone users may dial *9 to request to speak after joining the meeting. Computer and app users must use the raise hand feature to request to speak. And with that, I will ask individual members for their attendance. Paula Bertram.
Here.
Karen Menard.
Here.
Bob Pease.
Present.
Mike Tuell.
Here.
And Brandon Kibbe, Chairman, is present. I note Sarah Kammer and Lynn Mann are not present.
Are they in the waiting room by chance, Brandon? There's a new setup that we have to use now, and it uses the waiting room.
I'm not seeing.
Look at the participant list at the top.
Yeah, one person is waiting. Admit. That's Sarah. Okay, thank you.
I find this to be a major pain in the neck.
I'm finding it as well.
I wish I could make it go away.
Sorry for the wait, Sarah. I was busy reading the introduction and didn't see you there in the waiting room. Sorry for that.
Oh, my computer decided to update, so it's just a mess.
Perfect.
Sorry.
All right, that's all right. I will keep my eye on the top of the participant list. And with that, we've called the meeting to order. First order of business here is to review and approve the minutes from 9/22. Thank you, Paula, for sending those along today.
Yeah.
I move we approve the minutes as written.
Second.
Bob moved and Mike seconded. Any discussion, comments, or suggestions? Great, seeing none. I'll have a roll call vote to approve. Paula?
Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Sarah?
Hi.
Karen?
Aye.
And I am an aye as well. Thank you. Second item of business is we had scheduled our next committee meeting to be on November 17th, which I believe is also the date of the special town meeting. So we should reschedule that. Just looking at a calendar here, I would say either the week prior or the week following would be best. Stick with the Tuesday evening if that's okay with folks. So it'd be either Tuesday the 10th or Tuesday the 24th. Do folks have a,
The 10th.
The
The
10th.
24th.
The 10th.
Brendan, I have a 4, 5, and 7 o'clock meeting already on the second Tuesday, so adding a 6th is problematic for me.
Isn't the
Okay.
24th the week of Thanksgiving?
It
it
is.
is. I know I don't have any travel plans. So,
Okay.
Uh,
It's actually,
I
it
prefer
actually
the
is okay
10th as
with me.
well.
I'm sorry. Paul, can you say that again?
It would be okay with me.
Okay. How about you, Bob?
What?
The 24th, would that work for you?
I would prefer the 10th, but the 24th would work.
Okay. Karen, do you have a,
It would be fine.
okay, and Sarah?
Yeah, I can make it work.
Okay. I'd be inclined to have as many of our members be able to be present as possible. So if everybody can make it work on the 24th, then let's aim for that. All right, so we'll reschedule for the 24th and same time, 6 p.m. And I will do my best to communicate that with town manager, and hopefully that will work from a Zoom scheduling standpoint. If not, then I'll let you know and we can try to figure out another date to reschedule. Thanks for that. Next item of business on the agenda is the status of Old Stagecoach Road as it relates to the Table Rock Conservation Area access. And Table Rock Conservation Area, formerly known as the Saliba property, recently acquired. You'll remember that in that acquisition process, the town owns half of the road that goes into the Table Rock area known as Old Stagecoach Road. So if you're familiar with that area, Northfield Road, on the north side of Northfield Road, this is just before you get to the golf course. If you're headed west on Northfield Road, on your right, there's Old Stagecoach Road, and there's several residences that are located along Old Stagecoach Road, which gain their access via that gravel road. And there used to be a residence on the former Saliba property all the way in the central part of that parcel that had been there for literally hundreds of years, that had its access via that road as well. And you may remember from the town meeting, there were several abutters that own property there along Old Stagecoach who had concerns about, the public accessing that area. And so the status of the road is in question, whether or not it's a public way or not. Because it's an ancient way, one that goes really far back. I traced several of our source deeds back to the 1830s, and there's reference to a public way there all the way back to the 1830s. So it was probably established as a public way sometime in the early 1800s, maybe late 1700s. So finding the town meeting vote that actually established that would be quite a research project. But regardless, I think we have some interest there in making sure that we have rights for the public to pass there, and that we try to do our best to also accommodate the concerns of the abutters, that there's not sort of a never-ending train of people going by their front yard. So, there's recently there was a situation where one of the abutters put up basically a no trespassing sign at the end of the road, and the police were called in and asked them to actually remove that sign. And I think there's just sort of a public perception potentially issue there, and a public access issue there, that we want to make sure that we can maintain our neighborly relations with our neighbors there, but also make sure that the public can continue to access it. One of the things that came out through the acquisition process was the town council actually did a title report and showed that even barring the status of the road being in question, there is a reserved right of way that the public has to pass and repass to get to the back portion of that property. So even if it's not a public way, the town and the public has rights to cross. So, I think the purpose of this conversation here is mostly kind of open up for conversation. And I know, Bob, you and your committee have had some conversations about this, I think, as well, and see if there's anything that our committee can do to help support that. Go ahead, Bob.
I've been working with the town council on this matter first, and then through the town manager, I enlisted the help of the police department. Town council's interpretation of the deeds in right-of-way is that the town doesn't own half the road, the town owns the whole road, and that the abutters have the right to pass and repass over the road, but that doesn't give them the right to post no trespassing signs on town land or to bar the public from the use of the road. So, the assistant police chief went out there and spoke with the residents, told them, or asked them or told them, I'm not sure which, I wasn't there, to move the sign, and related back to Heather and I that, they had a different opinion, but nonetheless that they had, moved the sign, onto their own property. And that's the current status. The sign is still there, but it's, it's on their own property, off to the side. I do intend to take through the Conservation Commission and through my grant to attempt to put a gate up on Old Stagecoach Road, someplace farther up the road, so that, and I want to talk with the Hirsches about that. They own the lot in the back, to put it someplace that's, mutually, convenient for them. These gates will have a lock on them that will be one of those Knox locks, that have only the fire department can open. And so, but that's all still up in the air. Nothing's definite. But that is the current status. So long as we're talking about Old Stagecoach Road, I looked on, I went to, there's a Historic Aerials website, and I went to that, and you can go and you can look at the USGS maps from, like 1910 and 1915 and all that stuff. And those old USGS maps show Stagecoach Road going all the way through to Howard Street, which is the way it appears on the ground. And right now, the Conservation Commission is engaging with Seth Meyer or Steve Meyer, I'm not sure which. I thought it was Seth, but it looks on the land records like it's Steve, who owns the excavation
It's
company.
Seth.
It's Seth?
It's Seth.
Thank you, Paula. It's Seth. Steve Meyer, who owns a construction company, who volunteered. I just met him. I was out there on my mountain bike doing GPS, and I met him, and he volunteered that he'd be willing to clear the last bit of the road, which is now totally blocked with debris and a downed tree. And also, we're going to ask him to make a break in the stone wall so you can get onto Howard Street there right now, because if you look at the old maps, the northern end of Old Stagecoach Road used to go through what is now Seth's land, but that's been since subdivided off. So that's like a complete picture of Old Stagecoach Road from the Conservation Commission's point of view.
So a couple questions. Where would this gate go?
To be determined with the Hirsches, it'd be somewhere either at the beginning or at the end of the Hirsches property, depending upon how they feel about it. And to me, an important user group of all our conservation properties are snowmobiles. And so I have to speak with the snowmobile users group about, the placement of the gates and how much room is needed for snowmobiles to get by them, and so on and so forth.
So the purpose of the gate?
Is to, so vehicles, right now, Paul, if you go up on the Saliba property, there's evidence of heavy use by four-wheelers, ATVs, side-by-sides. The whole place is kind of torn up. And it's to keep vehicles out of there.
Okay. And the other question that I have is the break on the stone wall. You mentioned that's on Howard Street.
Yep.
You may just want to run that by Adam Burney because stone walls in Lunenburg are protected. I don't think Howard Street's a scenic way, but you just might want to check with Adam before you disturb the wall.
I have spoken
Okay.
with Adam about it.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Technically, we'd probably need a driveway permit there for a parking area, right? From
No
DPW?
parking on that side.
No parking on that side?
No.
Okay. And if you do end up doing parking on the other piece of town-owned land adjoining the 250 Howard Street, there is an existing barway
Yeah.
in the stone wall there, which accessed what was an orchard in that little area. It's flat and dry and really would make quite a nice little parking area in there. Very easy to open and establish right there.
My feeling is that there's abutters are too close to where the parking area would be on the south of Howard.
Yep.
And this is just all me making this up. None of this has been voted or approved by the Conservation Commission. These are just my initial thoughts. But if you look, north of Howard, which is not that far away, it's probably only 100 feet apart on Howard Street. There's plenty of room for a parking spot on that side where the parking spaces would be nowhere near any abutters houses, and, impact on their enjoyment of their property.
Right. I just shared my screen so you could see a couple of plans that I'll just show you here. This is plan of land that is that was created. What's the date on this one? It's 1976. This was for some conveyances that happened. Northfield Road is here. So this is oriented, east is up here, or is at the top of the page. And I just point you to this, is for this 5.0 acre parcel, the meets and bounds show here all the way around the edge, but then what you don't notice unless you look closely is it goes northerly by the center of the road. So this line here, this dashed line that goes through the center of the road
Yeah.
is considered the property line on that plan. The reason I show you that plan is because the later plan that is the genesis for our title also shows this is Stagecoach Road. The clarity of it isn't very clear until you get up into here. You can see dashed lines on either side and the solid line going down the middle. And then, sorry, I'm trying to pan and it's not working well for me. Once you get to the end of the property here, so it's going by the center line of the road here as well. That's why I say we own to the center of the road, Bob.
Yep.
This is the plan that we derive our title from. And this is where once you get to the end of the Hirsch property, which is this parcel here, once you get to the end of that, then we're owning on both sides of the road. So we would own the entirety of it there.
And I can only go by what, the town council told me. And in Adam's defense, he had not yet taken a deep dive into the documents. The person who did all the title work for the firm had just left the week before and was no longer in communication with the firm. So, all I can tell you is what town council told me.
Right.
So, and you know, the purpose of the gate is to keep out vehicular traffic, would be. And, you know, it's a quandary because, you know, a gate all that, you know, a half mile, I don't know how far it is to all the way to the back of the Hirsch's property, but if it has to be all the way to the back of the Hirsch's property, it's, I don't know how much good it'll do. So.
Well, I know in speaking with the Hirsches previously, they were, you know, in the context of the conversations we were having leading up to the town's acquisition, they were very amenable to a gate basically shortly after their driveway to their house. You know, obviously they would have to have some sort of access rights through that gate so that they, for their own management purposes of their property. But I think that would, you know, be a reasonable thing that we could be able to provide or should be able to provide. And certainly, my company operates recreational gates in places that even when they have a pin and a bell have multiple locks on them, or we instead of a pin with multiple locks, is we'll do a, you know, a combination lock or some other, if multiple people need to have access through it, then you change the combination periodically.
If you have a plan for a lock, for a gate with a lock and a bell that supports multiple locks so two people can open it, I would love to see that plan.
Yeah, what we have oftentimes is we have, even when it has a bell, the pin will come through the top, and we'll have locks on the top and locks in the bottom. And you can have a pin that goes through the pin. So there's a large diameter pin that goes through the middle, another pin that goes through this way, and then you actually have a lock hanging on either side. So you unlock one, slide the pin out, and then the whole shooting match comes out.
And both locks are protected inside a bell?
Yep.
I'd love to see that design if you can send it to me. But
Yeah, I'll sketch it
try
up for
to
you.
take away from the meeting. Let's go back to open
Yeah,
space.
that's okay. Great. Thanks. Well, just wanted to flag that for the committee, and I guess, Bob, let us know if there's anything further we can do to help support it.
Okay.
Let's see. Next item on the agenda. Marshall Park Master Planning. I know at the last meeting, Dave had mentioned the interest in the parks and taking up the master plan activity for Marshall Park. And I know that was a major component of our open space plan. I also have had a conversation with the president of the Lunenburg Skate Park, who's, you know, contacting other members of various boards as well, looking for continued support of that. And those two things got me thinking a bit more about this Marshall Park plan. And it did cause me to go back to the park grant program. And I sent some information along to the committee members about the park grant program, which, you know, just to get our committee thinking about, and hopefully Parks Commission thinking about that grant round, being that timelines are, you know, coming up, and there's deadlines that will be coming up. Ultimately there'll be a grant round announced probably sometime in March. Grant applications are generally due sometime in July, and then grant decisions are typically made, you know, by the end of a calendar year, sometimes in some point in the last quarter of the calendar year. I know for the Saliba acquisition, we found out, I think it was actually in September, which is really quite early, but you can find out for these grants sometimes as late as November. So given that, you know, there's a grant round that'll be opening in March, and some more information coming up there, that, you know, the time might be right for us to start thinking a little bit more if this is something that the Parks Commission is interested in pursuing in this upcoming year. You know, what can we do to help support the Parks Commission to help support that process? So Karen, I don't know if you wanted to chime in here and fill us in where the Parks Commission is and what they're thinking.
So we have started the discussions, and Dave's on as well, so if I leave something out, he can fill in the blanks. So we started the discussion, last meeting, we requested that everybody send over their ideas for what they would like to see at Marshall Park to our rec director, who is then gonna compile it. We have a meeting next week. I'm hoping that that's actually happened and we will have something compiled and we can start sort of picking away at it. Our rec director knows more about grants than I do. I know nothing. And the process is sort of, it's so foreign to me because I've never had to create a master plan for something that I sort of feel like I'm on a wing and a prayer here. So we'll take any help that we can get. Yeah, so we haven't gotten too far. We're still on like the beginning phases of trying to figure out what we want. Then we'll, obviously involve the public in discussions and then go from there. I don't know if any of that makes any sense.
It does. So it is something that you guys are thinking about for this upcoming year then? And getting
It's
that
our,
process going.
yeah, so one of our goals for this year is to create a master plan for Marshall Park. That's the plan. What do you got, Dave? Like, are you thinking I'm on the right direction with those comments, Dave?
Yeah, most definitely. I was just going to say that given the timeframes that Brendan just laid out in the next grant round, I think personally, I think that would tie in perfectly to put in for a grant for the actual design, because by that time we should have an idea of what we want the park to look like or what we want to include or keep and add, so on and so forth. And we're going to need some outside help to pull all of that together into a plan that makes sense. So if we can get engineering and design money to hire an outside concern to help us put that together, I think it would fit well into that time frame so that we could sell the master plan and hit the ground running within 18 months.
So one of the things, with the park grant, as was the case with the Saliba acquisition with land and grant and land and park grant funding, is that they are reimbursement grants, which means we have to have the monies allocated, and they can be allocated contingent upon successful application of a grant, which is how we've done these land acquisitions in the past with this type of grant funding. We said, that we take it to town meeting, we get the appropriation needed, but that appropriation is contingent upon successful receipt of the grant. So it's an important part of the process to remember, is that it's a reimbursement grant. So if in terms of the timeline, again, thinking about the timelines, if the grant is announced in March, and sometime late winter, early spring, and grant applications are due in July, that means we may want to be thinking about queuing something up for special or regular town meeting in May for an appropriation. But we may not be actually doing any work until we may not be doing any paid work from an outside consultant until we know we got the grant. So we may be doing a lot of other work, master planning, involving public process and everything else, a whole lot of work leading up to that point, but we may not actually be hiring anybody. In fact, it might be the exact right timing, right? As we go through all of the public input phase and we do all the sort of background work that we need to do, so that as soon as we know we have the grant, we hit the ground running with the consultant to do the design work. And then of course it goes into the construction phase if there's going to be a construction phase. So Sarah, you physically raised your hand. So
I did. I'm so old school. I was wondering, when we're thinking about grants, that the town putting up 64% of it might be a challenge. I was wondering if any of that park grant is in kind contributions, can count towards that or not?
So point of clarification, the reimbursement is 64% of the cost. So the town has to put up 36% of the cost.
Ah, thank you.
But as a reimbursement grant, the town has to put up 100% of the cost and get reimbursed the 64%. So
Yeah.
that's where the sort of the contingency piece comes in terms of the town meeting vote. You'll be asking for a larger nut than ultimately the town ends up spending. So to be able to explain that with a contingency in the vote that says, you know, we're only going to spend this money if we know we've got 64% coming back.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I think is important for us to flag here was, and I don't expect there to be, and usually these grant rounds change very little from year to year in terms of their requirements, but you may have noticed that there was special contingencies for communities that are less than 35,000 in population. And so there's a hard cap. I want to say it was $50,000. It might have been $100,000.
It's $100,000.
$100,000 hard cap on grants for communities under 35,000, unless the parking area for the park can hold over 100, has over 100 spaces, or if the facility is accessible by public transportation.
Right.
So I don't remember if MART goes to the center of town. I figured one of you do.
They did, for a short time they did, but I'm
Okay.
not sure if that was suspended. That was one of the points I was going to bring up, is that either public transportation or parking for 100 cars. And parking obviously is an issue at Marshall Park. There was an attempt to do the parking lot, and then that stopped for a while because of abutters' concerns. So I think that's something we're going to have to wrestle with, is whether or not we can get MART to provide public transportation there, or whether or not we can actually design a parking lot for 100 cars.
And it would be interesting to me you know, if we counted, I mean, you count the parking along Chestnut and the parking, the main parking area, are those two in total enough to support 100 vehicles? I bet we're close. I bet we're really close.
I think we are.
So, I mean, that would be something that, you know, and in the design phase, make sure we do, right? Is that make sure that it does support 100 vehicles. And if that's part of the application, then, you know, they're not marked spaces at this point, but we can say we have X number of square feet of parking area, and you need, you know, I don't know, whatever the minimums are you need for parking. Somebody knows how to do that math and can tell us how many spaces we actually have, you know, within reason.
So the planning board has guidelines on what's considered a legal parking space. So I'm happy to talk to Adam about that.
Okay, great.
So I guess my other huge ask of this group, and anybody who's available, our next meeting is the 19th of the month at, I think we're at 6:30. Marshall Park's not the first on our agenda, but if anybody's interested in coming, especially people that know, you can't see what my screen looks like, but it's the people in the top right and left corners. That's Paula and Brandon. If you'd like to come, we'd love to have you. Because this isn't against Dave or anybody else. I don't know what I'm doing, and I feel like I want to make sure we're going in the right direction. So anything, and, you know, input from any of you, especially around grants, is definitely welcome.
I'm happy to do it, and I think I can. Just trying to check.
I just looked and I'm happy to attend.
Thanks. And Bob and Sarah and Mike, you're also welcome to come. You know, again, it's just.
If we're all going to come, we need to
Oh
post.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Yep, that's true.
And actually, I think we need to post a meeting anyway. Karen, you're on the committee. So that would be 3. If another person attends and we're going to speak, we need to post.
Yep, that's true. True to that.
And I have my no, my daughter has a field hockey game that night, so I might not be able to make it.
Okay. We know where to find you.
I didn't hear the answer to the part of Sarah's question where she asked if the park grant local contribution could be in kind.
Sorry, I didn't, I realized I didn't answer that. I don't remember the guidelines for that, so we'll have to go back to the last fiscal year's grant round. All their information is still on that website, and I encourage everybody to kind of grind their way through some of those documents, particularly the bid document. There's a lot of information in there, and less so they have like a presentation of PowerPoint slides or something like that they went through at the annual workshops for grant recipients. But there's a good amount of information in those documents that can answer a lot of these questions. So I just don't remember the answer off the top of my head whether in kind is contributable.
I need to do some light reading. I'll look it up.
I want to say it's not.
It's not. I read it today and I didn't think that it was, and I just
Yeah.
pulled it up and it's not.
Thank you.
I did send out a list of other grants, and my recommendation would be to submit a couple grant applications simultaneously. Because some other programs have design services, for example. So Brandon, is that a problem to submit grant applications simultaneously?
Are they all to various state programs?
Hold on, let me look it up.
Because one of the things that comes up in these situations is you can't match state dollars with state dollars. So,
Okay. So there's a Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program that is through, it is a government grant. There's also, let's see, and that's for design services only. You mentioned the Fields Pond grant. That's 500,000 to 25,000, with most grants falling within the range of 2,000 to 10,000. So I think for this step, we'd want to go with the park grant.
Yep. And this isn't a great project for Fields Pond.
Right. So there is one through Bank of America. It's the Albert W. Rice Charitable Foundation. That might be an option. So that wouldn't be a government grant. So if we did that, that potentially wouldn't be a problem. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, typically you can, if you can raise other dollars, I mean, grant funds, especially through those private foundations, a quick phone call to that foundation might determine whether or not we're even remotely eligible.
Yeah.
So,
Paula,
Yes.
that email that you sent, was that the one from April of 2019?
No, I sent one recently. Did you not get it?
I don't think so.
I sent it to you and Dave. Dave, did you get it?
Yes, I did receive it.
You know when it was sent?
I'd have to go back through my email, and it's going to be buried about 30 emails into the list.
Karen, I'll resend it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Brendan, I had one quick question.
yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I've been in conversations with our legislators, and there is, of course, it's an election year for all of them, so there's a lot of interest right now. But I said, depending on who's in office after November, I've invited whoever's in office then to come take a tour of Marshall Park, and there seems to be genuine interest in helping us any way they can through state earmarks, funding, whatever. So based on your comment a few minutes ago, I would assume any funding that came from that direction would not help cover the town's responsibility on the parks grant side.
Yeah, typically not.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
But having a special earmark that 100% funded it would be great.
Go for every buck I can get.
There you go. Good. All right. Well, I think, obviously there's more to do on this, and I'm glad that we're kind of kicking it off a little bit more in earnest. So I guess let's stay in touch about it, and we can keep this on as a sort of a regular topic to revisit with this committee too, just in, as things progress. I don't know how much, we'll be able to be at all of your meetings, Karen and Dave, but if there are pieces that you can carve off to assign to us, or if there's ideas or things you need to bounce off of us or whatever, then we can have a place in our agenda for that.
Thank you.
Awesome. Anything else on that topic before we move on?
If I could, Brendan, real quickly, as you just volunteered your committee, I agree with Karen's.
Public comments come at the end, Dave.
I can save it to then if you want. I was just going to say that, I think within the commission, we've got the expertise to come up with what we want Marshall Park to look like. We have very little that I know of so far expertise in grant writing and grant accumulation, whatever you want to call it. So I'd like to ask as much as possible if this committee could be our liaison for the grant side of this as much as possible, and kind of teach us as we go into the process over the next year or so.
Awesome. And I think, I think our committee will continue to support that process, and grants in particular. I mean, I know Paula has a lot of experience in it. I've written my fair share. Sarah, I'm sure you've written a fair number of grants as well. So I think we've got a pretty decent team here that can definitely provide that support. And I'm more than happy to commit myself personally to helping to write grants, and I bet the other members are willing to do that.
I am too.
And another big piece of this 23-acre property is the fact that we're going to be dealing with a number of wetlands areas, and that's an expertise way out of our wheelhouse. So I haven't had a chance to have a discussion with the chair of CONSCOM, but I'm going to be approaching them in the near future also.
Great.
Thank you.
Sarah, you were going to say something?
Oh, I was going to say I'm happy to help with the writing. I'm less familiar with the state of Massachusetts, but grants are grants. And I actually do know how to delineate wetlands too. Just
Great.
saying.
And I do believe our rec director actually has a decent amount of grant writing experience. So I think she'll be a great help too. So hopefully, thank you folks so much. It's going to be good just to get this project off the ground
Absolutely.
on it.
Excellent. Dave's back, or rather Bob's back. Sorry for leaving you in the waiting room for so long, Bob. Let's see, moving on, just a quick update on the 250 Howard Street, Chapter 61 withdrawal. I wanted to let you all know that we did have a follow-up conversation with the Board of Selectmen, I think that was last week, and discussed the proposal that we had approved at our last meeting, and the board took that under advisement. All 5 select board members on a straw poll said they supported the proposal. And so we're working with the buyers and the sellers and town council to craft an agreement that will sort of ink everything and make that a reality. So once we have that inked, then we'll go back to the Board of Selectmen and ask them to formally vote to approve the agreement, and then waive the right of first refusal subject to the terms of the agreement. So
And do we have an article on special town meeting as a placeholder?
yes, we do.
Okay,
both for the exercise of the right of first refusal and just for the acquisition of a portion of the property. So both are in there as placeholders.
Okay.
Any further questions about that one? Okay. Next topic, update on general municipal properties planning, specific update on 671 West Street, 111 Mulpus Road rear, and 970 New West Townsend Road rear. Bob, you're back on. I don't know if you wanted to start by taking up the conservation pieces.
Yes, that's the reason I have to leave the meeting at 7 is they're on the agenda tonight. The Board of Selectmen, with one exception, expressed general support at the last Selectmen's meeting, but they didn't take a formal vote. And so they are going to take a formal vote tonight. So I expect that they will go forward. So that's where that stands.
Great, thanks. And they
And by
did.
the way, I'm also in the waiting room on my computer now too.
So an update, they expressed support on what parcels? On all three?
No,
On 671?
No,
West-
so the Conservation Commission was putting forth the 111 Mulpus Road and the 970 New West Townsend Road to have those conveyed or committed to the care and control of the Conservation Commission.
Yeah,
And so those are the ones that the board are taking up this evening for a formal vote, as I understand it. And there are also placeholder warrant articles for those as well. Anything further to add on that, Bob?
well, I on a related topic, I watched the last planning board meeting.
mm-hmm,
And I was disappointed, very frankly, to see, our representative from the planning board say that, they thought the planning board also take a look at all of the municipal parcels. I mean, I thought that's what the open space committee was going to do. And, we were asking authorization, from the planning board to do that. And if the planning board is going to do it at the same time we're going to do it, I think it has the opportunity to get awkward.
yeah, and maybe I misspoke, Bob. That's certainly not what I meant. I was looking for authorization, and there was a little bit of pushback on that from a member expressing concern about what we'll be doing. So I do think at some point we're going to need to have. I would recommend that we make an appointment with the planning board just to talk about what our recommendations are. I think there was some concern that this is getting into an area of master planning. I tend to disagree, and I agree with you that the Open Space Committee, and I agree with the recommendations of the last meeting, that the Open Space Committee should take the first look, and then, as we talked about, inviting various departments in. So if that's not the gist that I delivered, then I apologize, because that's what I intended.
Thank you, Paula. That's great news. I mean, obviously, this committee only has the power to make recommendations.
Right.
And, any recommendations that we make, go to the Board of Selectmen and to the Planning Committee, and so they have more than adequate opportunity, to weigh in on it and anything. But I think this committee is kind of unique in that we have a representative from Parks, we have a representative from Planning, we have a representative from Conservation. To me, the only people we have to reach out to possibly is schools and possibly I'm drawing a blank now. The roads people.
DPW.
Thank you. Thank you. DPW. Thank you for saving me from my senior moment there.
And I guess I would extend that to places like the cemetery department.
Yep. You're right. You're right. You're right.
I think what we talked about at the last meeting was us taking a first look at the list and then coming up with a consensus of what we thought as a committee, and then inviting the various other boards to attend and to involve them in a discussion. That was my understanding. Maybe I misunderstood, Brandon, if you can clarify, and that's what I put in the minutes. So is that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think maybe the first step is is one where, where we convene. We start by figuring out what the process is, and I don't know what that, and I think that's really the sort of the first step is, I think we've talked about it now where that's, I think we think this is the right next thing to do, is to have this process. Now we've got to define what that process is going to be like and who's going to be involved and who's going to be at the table. And I think that's really the most important thing. And then maybe that's one of the things we take up at this next meeting is we very carefully define what that process is and who should be involved. And I think, or maybe we're doing it now. I mean, we could also just carve out 5 minutes here and be clear who we think this invitation should be extended to. And I would be also clear is that doesn't mean if there's another committee that or board that thinks they ought to be involved, that we'll take all comers,
Right.
And I think that's an important message is that, heck, the Agricultural Commission may make sense to have at the table, and probably makes a lot of sense to have at the table, actually, especially given how many of our parcels, our town-owned parcels are actually farmed. So, there's probably a good, there's any number of different committees that might want to have involved.
So I guess I'm confused about trying to develop a process without having a handle on exactly what the parcels are. I did go back to the open space plan and I tried to look at the maps, and we talked about the teal color on the maps, and because of the overlay on the maps, it's very difficult to look at. And the list that's in there is very, very small, and I wasn't able to look at whether or not there's a list of actually the general municipal parcels. So that's a question that I had. Is there an actual list incorporated in the open space plan?
Yes. So
Okay.
there's a list in Appendix 7 of the open space plan, and I will share my screen. And this is the fine print that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And that was mostly just to make it fit into the silly plan without taking 3,000 pages. So it is listed, and the second page of this list, as I scroll down, you see all these, yeah, they actually starts here, is general municipal lands.
Yeah.
And then goes all the way down to here on the second page.
Okay.
So, and this is the list is the best of our ability to produce it for the open space plan. There may be other parcels, but
Do you have this in an Excel spreadsheet?
yes, that's how this was generated.
Can you send out the portion?
Parent spreadsheet. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, because I think that would be really helpful, because I started creating my own. Because I started going back through the properties and taking a look at, I thought what we were going to talk about is just looking at the parcels and my suggestion would be to look at our existing criteria for right of first refusal, to determine whether or not there's properties that we think would be of interest for acquisition, because we've already developed a process.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we go through that process, we'll determine whether or not, well, it might not meet this criteria, but maybe this department might be interested. Let's ask them. I mean, to me, that's what would make the most sense. But I think where we have to start is going through the list and looking at them. That's just my thought process, because.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen ultimately is that, the list is almost going to answer itself in a lot of,
Exactly.
And what we're going to end up doing is we're going to probably end up spending a lot more time on a handful of parcels that are either have multiple uses or we just can't, there's disagreement in terms of what the best outcome is or whatever, but that the majority of this list will sort of self-identify. Secondly, to me, it's also, it's a part of the charge here that we should be trying to accomplish is what do we do about, is other sort of process related questions, in terms of tax title, for instance. When we get a whole new batch of tax title parcels that are coming up for tax title foreclosure, is there a process that the town then goes through to vet it through various committees for potential municipal use before it gets, potentially conveyed back out?
Yes.
Is
yes.
that kind of thing is what is just define the price, like our Chapter 61 defined. There's now a defined process that the town follows. That's very detailed in terms of the steps that get taken and what's considered and everything else. We define what that process is, and that way we don't miss opportunities down the road, and that there's less infighting.
Okay, so I know that the Board of Selectmen have a process, or at least they did, when going through the tax title process. And so I think we can obtain that from the Board of Selectmen. And I'm happy to talk with Heather about that.
Great.
I guess, and I have no problem creating the process, but I just think that, we also have an existing list, and as you said, I think it will self-identify. So, my recommendation would be, to review the process for tax title as identified by the Board of Selectmen and incorporate a review process, or that each parcel also be reviewed by the Open Space Committee or whatever process we define, but that we look at the open space criteria for each parcel and determine whether it meets the open space criteria for acquisition, and then circulate it to other departments for their input. I mean, I'm not sure what else the process would be. I mean, so if it doesn't meet open space or conservation, then I think it would go to all the other departments, to planning, to the school committee, to see if they're interested. And if they're not interested, then the property is potentially auctioned and put back on the tax rolls. I mean, I don't know what the other process would be.
Well, I guess what I'm thinking is, is how many people do we want sitting at the table to review that list? We review the list and we come up with a set of recommendations. Do we want that to be our committee's recommendation, or the recommendation of a broader subset of boards?
I think the first step is to go through all the parcels and develop a description of each one, and how flat is it? Is it in a significant, habitat, that sort of thing.
Does it abut conservation land? Is it significant habitat? Does it provide continuity? I mean, I think we need to look at it from our own criteria first. And as Bob said, and this is what I started doing, is I started creating notes for each parcel about highlights or does it provide access to Lake Shirley? Does it provide continuity between two conservation parcels? I think we take the first stab at it and come up with a general description, and then circulate that to the other boards and ask for their input. And the list that doesn't necessarily meet any of our criteria, maybe we create a spreadsheet that shows our 7 criteria and check off which of those 7 criteria it meets. Make our recommendations, but then at the same, once that's complete, then circulate it to the other town boards. I just think we have to, rather than just trying to come up with, my point is we already have a process. So I think we should initiate our own process first, and then create a process for parcels that don't necessarily meet open space criteria, but to get input and recommendations from other boards for parcels that don't, to determine what their final recommendation is going to be. But as Bob said, I think it's important we go through the list first.
So,
And I'm sorry, but I have to leave now to join the selectmen's meeting.
All right,
bye,
Bob. see you, Bob.
Bye.
So I guess the one I tend to agree with you on all of that because, you know, from an open space perspective, is that, you know, if we go through that, we go through the list and we apply the open space criteria and we determine which ones should be open conservation or recreation parcels. That's one way to do it, but that's not an inclusive way, because we may be saying, well, that one's important for open space or conservation or recreation, but somebody else, another board, another commission could say, actually, that's really important for our needs, because whatever their criteria are. And what I'm saying is, if we can get more people around the table to have those conversations at this stage, we can kind of hash that out. And rather than we send our list and say, yeah, these are the ones that we think should be conservation or recreation, and then somebody else sends their list back that says, well, we want that one, and then all of a sudden there's all this infighting over it. And what I'm trying to do is just say, can we create an inclusive process here that gets whatever land managing using potential boards to the table, and that if there is disagreement about what the right ultimate outcome is for a piece of land, maybe ultimately it stays as general municipal until there's a compelling reason otherwise. But in the framework of that conversation, if those instances come up, and maybe there are not many, and I'm guessing there probably aren't many, but if they do come up, it'd be better to handle them in that sort of situation rather than we stake a flag in the ground and say, no, this is open space, this is conservation, this is recreation, and now all of a sudden, you know, people are going to retreat to their corners, and that's what I'm trying to avoid.
And I completely understand that, but I also think without some legwork of describing the parcels, doing the homework of behind, where is this property, what's the value of the property, exactly how you have the acreage already. So I started going through and looking at the value of the property. What is it assessed at? Where is it? You know, what kind of habitat is it? And giving a description, because if my fear is, it's difficult to get volunteers to sit at a table, to sit at another meeting. And if we just try to develop a list, we just send the list and say, okay, we want to have this new committee, this new inclusive process, without a more descriptive initial step, I don't think we're going to get very far.
That's fair. I agree with that.
So I think what I'm hearing is that it would be great if we could get more description of the parcels, and then we could get the people at the table so that we don't have us all having figured out a list and left somebody out, and then have all sorts of constant bickering about why somebody wasn't included sooner. That seems to be the summary for me.
It's a good summary.
That's a good summary.
Okay. In which case I agree with that plan.
So let's identify who would we invite to sit at the table?
I think the bigger question for me is, who wouldn't we invite?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, when I look at the list, I think everybody, you know, just even other elected boards or departments, I'm not seeing anybody I would exclude. I mean, down to cemetery. You know, I would say everybody.
Yeah. So to me, the first ask would be to develop this list, circulate it to the various boards and say, we'd like you to take a look at this property and look at this list and identify any properties that you feel may be of interest. And then, so for example, if you know, I don't know, the school department isn't interested in any of the parcels. They really are not interested in any. So there's no reason then for them to necessarily be involved in the determination of what properties what the use of property should be. But I think we circulate the list. But we also inform them that we're looking to develop a process. And if you want to be involved in the conversation, to have a joint meeting. I just think in this time, right now, during Zoom, trying to get people to commit to attending a meeting is going to be difficult. I think that, let's face it, we keep seeing the same faces over and over and over again. So
I don't think we want to send people on a wild goose chase either. I mean,
exactly.
there's, some of us understand looking at a map and looking at contours, and some of us don't. And some of us look at a piece of property from a distance and we're like, oh, that's flat. That would be perfect for a rectangular field. And then,
Maybe,
the reality is it's a gigantic hill. So, I think having a better idea of what's there, so people aren't, going to look at these pieces of property and then finding out they're, half wetlands, or I think that's a good idea.
so when I'm thinking about that list, I remember when I came on this committee and I was like, oh my God, that's a whole lot of parcels all over town. I have no idea what these are like. I think if we send that with the description to different boards, they might just go, okay, and maybe not show interest because they don't know what they're looking at necessarily. Not that we wouldn't highlight the parts that are important, but we might want to say, hey, we were looking at this and we think maybe you'd be interested in these particular parcels. There's certainly others that may be important to you, but in terms of schools, maybe this is important. In terms of parks, maybe this is important. Maybe you want to look at these. We're not sure if it meets your needs, but hey, here's what we see on this parcel, because otherwise, it's a long list.
Mhm.
And I think people will get glossy.
I agree. So
The
I
other-
just,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
The other thing I was thinking is, even though a board might not, when we send out that list, might not express interest, it might be good to still invite them, because
Oh,
sitting and
absolutely.
sitting
Absolutely.
and listening to this kind of discussion, you're like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Maybe actually we need this
Mhm.
for
I think
access or
the more people,
something.
the better.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and one of the things we can do to kind of prepare for this conversation is, we can consolidate, we can do a different version of our existing land inventory map that has, I just sent the spreadsheet off, just so you have it. We can index with numbers, each one of those parcels is a single 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We can put, break the town into quadrants on a map and then number which parcel is which. So people can literally physically, look at just sort of where it is, and generally speaking. And then, like you said, I mean, we could go through, this list and actually answer some other questions that we may have. I mean, we had to answer a certain number of questions for the open space plan. That's why it's laid out the way it is. We can certainly break open some more tabs in that, and for some other descriptions. But it's gonna, that's a fair amount of homework for. I didn't do the numbers, but quite a number of parcels. So, but again, I mean, when you look at the acreage, how many of them are sub 1 acre parcels, and many of them, they're, all fractions of an acre.
Many of
So-
them are, but it was interesting in looking at some of them. Some of them still may be of interest, even though they're tiny little pieces, because of where they are, or because of what they abut.
Like 111 Mulpus Road and
Exactly.
there's some of them are just sort of completely obvious.
Exactly.
All right.
So what do we do? You sent out the list.
I sent out the list. I guess, I don't want to keep kicking the can down the road here. So it seems to me, it would be good, sorry, it'd be good for, how do we divide this work up so that the next time we get together, we're actually making some progress on this? I guess that's what I'm thinking. You're on mute, Paula. Oh, you're not talking to me.
I'm talking to my husband.
Oh. Tell him I said hi, by the way. Okay, so, I mean, I'm thinking we have to, there's a mapping component to this potentially. And then there's, if somebody wanted to take a first cut at applying our open space metrics to these parcels.
I'm happy to do that. I started doing that actually
Okay.
on a lot of them. I'm happy to take a look at that.
And are you using the habitat maps and all that other stuff that we have in the open space plan?
Mhm.
That's how you're doing that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it would be interesting for others to do that, to go through that same process as well, just to see, I mean, and then we come back and we compare notes.
I think if we could all take a look and jot down, our initial comments or notes, if we all looked at the criteria, does it meet these criteria, and then put your own notes, because they're all going to be different. My thoughts aren't going to necessarily be the same as Sarah's or Karen's or yours, but then we could come back and talk about it.
I'm glad we pushed the meeting one more week.
All right, good. Well, I mean, all that information, you now have a spreadsheet that you can look at a little bit more functionally, is in the, with the land inventory map. Each one of these general municipals are shaded that teal color. There's all of the various other maps with the parcels overlaid on them. So you should be able to kind of compare and contrast, and some of the things will be obvious and some of them will be less obvious. The one thing, and then I would encourage everybody as well, is to reflect on all of our objectives in the open space plan, not just the criteria that we're applying for potential open space acquisitions. So protecting agricultural viability, for instance. If there's active agricultural fields on these parcels, we should be aware of that and think about, what that means for the future of that property, even if it doesn't meet all of the sort of open space criteria that we have defined. Pocket parks, we talked an awful lot about pocket parks. That's not necessarily reflected in the open space criteria. So there's more in terms of our goals and objectives that are in the open space plan than are contained in that criteria. So just apply a broader brush, I would think. And maybe there's another column, maybe there's another 2 columns of things that we want to consider beyond the 6 check marks that we have for the open space acquisition criteria.
Yep.
Is there a benefit to breaking down the subject matter that each of us are looking at so that we don't all look at everything in its entirety for every parcel?
It's a good thought. My initial reaction is that we all might be looking at it through a slightly different lens. So I don't know that I could look at conservation the same way as Sarah might, as the way you might. So, but I guess what I'd say is that if there's a criteria, or maybe there's 2 criteria that you as a committee member care about, that you want to evaluate on, I think that works.
Yeah.
And if somebody wants to evaluate on all criteria, that works too. And ultimately, we're going to be comparing notes anyway. So I don't know. How do other people feel about that? I think it's a really good suggestion, Mike. I'm not sure how it works for me, but how do other folks feel about that?
Not that you wouldn't look at, if you wanted to, you wouldn't look at everything in its entirety, but if one person were looking at prime farmland soils as their as their primary goal, and another was looking at connectivity to other public lands as their primary goal, it doesn't mean you can't look at the wetlands and rare species habitat and topography and road access or whatever other criteria you want to apply to it. It's just your first look, your first concentration is, I'm looking at prime farmland soils. I'm looking at areas to see where there's historical agriculture. So I'm going to concentrate on that, and I'm going to find all this other stuff.
So when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about the maps that we already have. A lot of this information is encapsulated in that map distribution. So I was going to focus in on some other things like, is that area flat? Can it become rectangular field when it's not in a prime habitat location? Does it give parks to other parts potentially of Lunenburg? Because I do think we have some concentrations that are lovely. But when we were talking about pocket parks, we were thinking about distributions for other residential areas. And I don't think our original 7 criteria when we're talking about purchasing land necessarily applies to a lot of this municipal land. But since we already have it in municipal land, there might be some stuff we can do with it that doesn't require a purchase now. So I was going to look at that aspect of it and also think about, connecting different neighborhoods, because right now we're all just kind of isolated by cars. Those were the things I was going to look at.
So if you take out the properties that are currently under conservation or under cemetery or public works, or if you take out the undesignated land, because I used your spreadsheet, Brandon, and I kind of took out everybody that lands that's already in use, we're talking about 31 parcels.
Just the general municipal parcels, right?
Right. So it's not an overwhelming amount of
Right.
property. So I think if we all kind of take a first crack at looking at those 31 properties, if we take a crack at looking at those 31 properties and come back with our initial, thoughts, I think we'll make a lot of headway. And we'll have a great description, because everybody's like Sarah's going to focus on topography. I may focus on proximity to existing wetlands. So I think we'll have a really good start of the conversation and come up with a good list and some good initial recommendations and a good idea of what departments make sense to, as Sarah said, to give some initial recommendations to.
And if I may, Brandon, I agree with you, Paula, but the property that also needs to be included in there is the one that's named Lake Shirley, Parmenter Street. I believe that's also I think it's just been named something. So I think
it's 51 Parmenter, I think.
Yeah. Yep. But it was sort of given a name. It's not like the Eagle House. It's actually a general municipal piece of land that would be available for another group to take ownership of.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. And this doesn't have this list that you sent, Brandon, has the assessor's parcel ID, but it doesn't have the address. Does it?
It may not.
I don't see the address.
I don't see it either.
I may be able to pull that just by joining a table through GIS, so I can create another table with all the assessors.
Okay, because I started going through today and I just was pulling reports from the assessors database to get kind of an idea, because I didn't have access to the open space plan, or I couldn't zoom in on it. My computer was being very odd. But Parmenter was definitely of interest, the parcel you're talking about, Karen.
Yep.
So, what I want to do now is once we have I want to compare the list I came up with today with this list, because I don't want to miss any.
Yeah, and that's also an important point, is that this list
It's
was
old,
2018.
right,
So
right.
it's already out of date.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
And so there, there may be other parcels that aren't on here that are general municipal. And this, the other thing too, I mean, this list is only as good as the data that's behind it. So a parcel that's owned as general municipal land, unless you check the deed, you may not know for sure whether or not it was, is actually general municipal, or it's dedicated to the care and control of the Conservation Commission. It was just missed.
Yeah,
So, some of this stuff is, you just have to, there's a little bit more research that we may have to do behind it. So our initial cut, I think that's all it is. And we'll, there's probably some more work to do once that's done.
The original data source for generating this list, Brandon?
Was the assessor's data.
Okay. So is that something that you can go into anyone can go into the assessor's database and recreate this list in real time and current time?
Except that this is annotated. So the background data, and then we added, property name, level of protection, conservation, or CR or APR, conservation restriction or agricultural preservation restriction, whether or not there were grants that were used to acquire the property. And then we did the current use, public access, the condition, all that stuff all those columns were produced by the Open Space Committee.
So if we were to go in now to try to update this list to 2020, it would be lacking all of that, but would it not generate another list that we could put up against this one that showed all of the general
Yes.
municipal parcels?
Yes, and there's the line in the assessor's data is the land use code. It's a 3-digit code.
Right.
And that land use code goes against the Department of Revenue's list of land use codes. And so you can sort it by land use code. And I'm just looking that up right now. The book doesn't change much year to year. I'm looking at a version that was dated June of 2016, but so municipal properties are in the I want to say the 900s. Their exempt properties are in the 900s, yes. So let's see. Municipal or county codes. So it's in the 930s. So 930 is vacant selectmen or city council. 931 is improved selectmen or city council. 932 vacant conservation. 933 vacant education. 934 improved education. 35 improved municipal public safety. 936 vacant tax title treasurer. 937 improved tax title treasurer. 938 vacant district. 939 improved district. So those codes.
Where did you get that, Brandon?
It's the Department of Revenue Division of Local Services property type classification codes. They publish a booklet on it, and so if you just search on Google Department of Revenue Division of Local Services property codes or land use codes, you'll find a link for it.
Okay. But do you know how you go into the online system to generate that list? Because I could generate it by property owner name, but I couldn't figure out how to do it by land use code.
So the way I do it is I go through the GIS data. So the online GIS data, which you can download off of the Mass GIS website, and they have embedded in that all of the assessor data associated with it. So it produces tables, nice
Okay.
tables that you can export into Excel
Okay,
and that you can then
Okay.
manipulate and you can map from.
okay.
So, I mean,
Okay.
that's how I got this data and generated this table. So I can download the most recent version of that and circulate it, or we can go to the assessor and ask them for it and have them give us a list of all municipal owned properties in town by land use code. They should be able to do that for us in relatively short order.
Yeah, because I was trying to use the assessors database and it wouldn't do what I wanted it to do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've,
The assessors, I can give them a call tomorrow and ask them if they'd be willing to generate, but do we want all municipal land or do we want just general municipal land?
I would just get the whole list for all municipal owned land, and then we can sort it by land use code.
Okay. All right, I'll
And,
give them a call
and,
tomorrow.
and you want to make sure that they have all the property address information and all that good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, we want the address, basically everything that they have on it, the value. Yeah, okay, all right.
But then for our purposes, from that list, Paula and Brennan, we're interested in what falls under general municipal, correct?
Right.
Okay.
And, one of my first orders of business will be compare that list to the list that we have in the open space plan and see where it's different.
Yep.
Okay, I'd like to move on from this topic. There was a specific update on that we missed in this agenda item on 671 West Street, and I just did want to fill you in on that, which is that, I mean, I had circulated, there was a town meeting vote that authorized conveyances. There was a map that was associated with that. I had circulated that to committee members so that you had some updated information on what was authorized by previous town meetings. And if you look at that map, you'll see that it was only specific portions of the property of 671 were authorized for potential future conveyance. So the remainder of that property remains and the majority of it remains in general municipal ownership. So that's one property that will remain on this list for consideration.
Did the recommendation to convey that 100 by 150 foot parcel go over to the selectmen?
I believe so. And I think I don't know what they ended up voting on there. So sorry, I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Okay,
But I believe because it was already approved, by town meeting and we made the recommendation, I believe they were okay with moving forward with it, but I don't know what the final vote was.
okay.
So moving on to the next agenda item, review of the Chapter 61A withdrawal notice for 360 Flat Hill Road. And there's a potential here that we would vote for a recommendation to the planning board and select boards. So you should have received in your circulated information the notice of withdrawal, which includes the purchase and sale agreement. It had a plan of land, it had some generic information in there about the property. Everybody receive that information? Does anybody have any specific questions before we dive in further?
That's the small orchard that's down the street from the Flat Hill Orchards?
Yep, and in fact, it's owned by the owners of Flat Hill Orchard, the Kimballs. Okay. They're the sellers, so it is part of Flat Hill Orchards. It's just a separate piece.
Just for reference, Mike, I do believe it's about 7 acres of orchard that's the inhabited part of it, I guess you could say, with orchard trees, and then the remainder is just mostly wooded.
And in fact, I think when you look at the aerial photograph of it, and if you're familiar with the parcel, it's orchard and there's row crops there. I believe they planted squash there most recently. So, and I think the actual agricultural acreage is probably more like, 12 or 13 acres out of the total. So I agree that maybe 7 or 8 of the acres are in orchard.
I
But
didn't see any squash. We didn't see any row plantings up there. Lynn Mann and I walked it
okay,
a week or two ago. I didn't see any of that up there. I just saw the fruit trees, but it's a nice piece of property.
yeah. So obviously this is an interesting piece. 23 acres in size. Purchase price is listed as $600,000 in the purchase and sale agreement. It's a large flat parcel with a lot of road frontage on Flat Hill Road and also on Watt Street or Road. And there's, as was discussed, is a lot of open agricultural land, then forested portion of the property. I don't know if folks have had a chance to look at it in comparison to any of our criteria. But just as a reminder, the open space acquisition criteria that we consider is, number one, is it within a priority zone that's been designated either for water quality protection, scenic landscape preservation, or agricultural protection, or is it for important wildlife habitats? And then second is we have 6 identified criteria, and if it's in one of those priority zones for acquisition, does it meet 3 of these 6 acquisition criteria? Is it greater than 50 acres in size? Does it contain important habitat resources? Does it provide public access and/or recreation? Is it important for scenic vistas and maintaining rural character? Is it contiguous to other protected open spaces or recreation resources? And does it support local agricultural viability? I'm going to share my screen again. And I'm going to come over to this map here. This is Flat Hill Road here. This is Watt. And this is the 23 acres. Flat Hill Orchard is up here. There's other Chapter 61A, Chapter 61A, Chapter 61B, and Chapter 61 land in this vicinity as well. I'll bring that map up in a second. And this is the plan of land for the parcel, shows all the frontage on Flat Hill Road and the frontage on Watt Street here and here. And if we go to the open space plan, first off, let's look at, we know it's not greater than 50 acres in size. Does it contain important habitat resources? So if we go to significant wildlife habitats and we zoom to this area of Flat Hill Road, the parcel is here. You can see it's within an area of critical environmental concern, ACEC. Second criteria, or third criteria rather, public access and or recreation. We know it's got a lot of frontage on 2 roads, so whether or not that counts as public access for recreation, it's not contiguous. Let's go to the land inventory. Land inventory map. Oops, shoot, sorry. Try that again. So you can see here, orange is 61A, brown is chapter 61, and this yellow color is 61B. So there are other chapter 61 parcels in the vicinity. It does not directly abut any other municipal or other conservation or recreation lands. And this orange part up in here is Flat Hill
Brandon?
Orchard. Yep.
That light beigey color, is that the Conway land?
Yes.
That land is, I believe it's come out of chapter.
Okay.
I believe that's the piece that might have been, one section of it was removed and they're now looking to sell it. So I believe that's come out of chapter.
Yeah, I did hear that was being subdivided. So, okay. Okay, so that's the contiguous and public access piece. While I'm here, I'm just going to quickly look at where is it? Agriculturally significant soils. This is one that jumped out at me. That entire hill is prime agricultural soils, and the entirety of that parcel is either prime or statewide significant agricultural soils. So the brown color here is prime agricultural soils. It's the highest priority. And then the orange color is statewide significant. So you can see that almost the entire parcel is either prime or statewide significant soils. The reason that matters is because, well, first of all, they're the best farming soils there are, obviously, but it's also, because it's in active agriculture, it's also easily maintained as agriculture. It's rather than, some of the things that are mapped in this town as prime agricultural soil, like my house, for instance, is all developed and it's sort of meaningless as prime agricultural soil, whereas in some places it's all grown up as forest, and it's not really, it's more difficult for it to, but this is already agriculture, so it's more easily maintained as agriculture. And the other thing is that agricultural soils are a key component to agricultural protection programs like the Agricultural Preservation Restriction Program. If they have prime ag soils, their ranking goes up for agricultural preservation. And then scenic and unique resources. I think it's unique and scenic resources. Flat Hill Road is a designated scenic road in town. And a portion of the property is within a designated scenic landscape as designated by the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. So statewide scenic resources. And then let's see sorry.
Matrix. Cool.
So, and it is, in terms of supporting agricultural viability, it's got the soils and everything else, and it's also part of one of our largest remaining unprotected farms in town, which is Flat Hill Orchard. So, so just going through those resources, this is an interesting one, I think. It's obviously for $600,000 would be a major investment. But at the same time, this parcel does seem to meet a number of our criteria. So with that, I wanted to open it up to discussion from other committee members and see what people are thinking.
Well, I think we have to evaluate it based on our criteria. I mean, it's the criteria we developed. It's what we use when looking at any property that's coming out of chapter. So I don't know why we would differ on this. I'm not sure about the public access piece, provides public access and/or recreation. I'm not sure how I feel about that one, because yes, it has frontage. Yes, it's a large flat parcel, but I don't know that it currently provides that. So I'm not sure about that. But even without that one, it meets 4 of our criteria. I also don't think the town can swing for $600,000. So, I mean, I think our recommendation needs to be to consider acquisition. But quite frankly, I would not be surprised if the selectmen don't, because I don't see town meeting passing it. But that's just my opinion.
So, well, before I speak any further, I'll keep the floor open to other committee members.
Can we talk about what the potential highest and best use on behalf of the town would be if the town were to acquire it?
Sure. What are you thinking?
Well, I mean, I was involved in Littleton when we acquired, when I lived there years and years ago, and we acquired an orchard to keep it from being developed because it was prime farmland soils. It was very scenic. It's a really cool place. And the town went ahead and bought the orchard and then leased it back to an operator who continues it to this day as an orchard operation. The town gets $1 a year or something from the guy, is the deal. And he, his company runs the orchard and takes the profit, from the orchard. That was the deal that the Littleton Board of Selectmen struck in order to be able to buy the property. And I think we did it with some open space grant money from the state back then. What do you think we would do with a 7-acre orchard and a 3-acre squash field going, down the road? Why would Lunenburg buy this? Is my question. I'm not against it. I'm just asking, what do we do with it? It meets our criteria, but does it? Because our criteria also have to do with more conservation, I think, more conservation open space. It could have to do with agricultural open space. Does the town really want to start to run an orchard, or do you want to lease it back to the people who are taking it out of 61A?
Well, I'll take a stab at answering that question, which is, when I think of agricultural viability, I don't think of state-run agriculture. I think of local farmers being able to continue to farm in an economically viable way in our community. That's the way I see it. And every time you take agriculturally significant land out of production and put it into development, you impact the economic viability of farmers in town to continue to do their thing. The old adage that they're not making any more of it holds, particularly in agricultural economics in particular. So what Littleton did is an interesting model. And what I see here is an opportunity to do something interesting. not necessarily to do something standard, which is town comes in, town acquires, and then figures out what to do from there. In my mind, here we have the largest unprotected farm left in Lunenburg, Flat Hill Orchard, is deciding to liquidate a portion of its property for whatever reason, but they need cash, or they want cash, and that to me is something that we should explore with the owners of Flat Hill Orchard to see what is it that we can do to maintain their viability as an orchard, to keep them going, so that the rest of that line of dominoes don't fall up there. That to me is an opportunity that this presents. Whether we are able to exercise our right of first refusal and do anything here to prevent this from being however many house lots, 8 house lots or whatever it's going to be, there's a broader opportunity here to have a larger conversation about how do we conserve the other parcels up on Flat Hill, and how do we maintain Flat Hill's viability. So that's number one. Number two, the other thing I'm thinking is that town acquisition and town exercise and acquisition of its right of first refusal is one option. The town has another option, which is to assign its right of first refusal to another party. And sorry, I muted myself by accident. There is the possibility of working with a conservation nonprofit, a land trust, for instance, hello pup, that we could work with to assign the right of first refusal so that the land trust could purchase it. And if a land trust purchases the property under the assignment, they're required by statute to protect 70% of the property, permanently protect 70% of the property. Now, that doesn't mean the land trust has to continue to own 70% of the property. It has to be permanently protected. So they could do that with a conservation easement. So there's a way, you could conceivably come up with a way where you could divide off, where a land trust working with a conservation buyer could divide off a couple of house lots in that 30% unconserved, still protect the agricultural land under a conservation easement, and sell the underlying ownership of that land to a farmer at an affordable price that the farmer could continue to farm it in a viable way. Keep the houses out of the agricultural fields, keep 100% of the property on the tax rolls, and protect the most important scenic and agriculturally important portions of the property.
Town could also do that without assignment, right?
You can do that without assignment, but that requires the town to take on those roles. And, you know, and I don't have that much faith in town government, I guess. That feels risky to me. I feel like that's a job perfectly suited for our nonprofit partners, and maybe one that could be potentially disastrous if we try to run it.
Brandon, do we have any pieces of land in that situation that you just described within town at this point?
That are subject to conservation restrictions?
Well, that were, you know, we basically gave our right of first refusal to reassigned it. Do we have what you just described where with land trusts, and do we have any chapter land that came out and
I don't think we do. I'm not familiar with any time when we've done that. Part of the reason is probably because we don't have a whole host of land trusts that we could partner with. The one land trust that's active in this region and has become more active in Lunenburg is the North County Land Trust. And they certainly have a certain amount of expertise and capability. And I've introduced this idea to them as an option, and I'm looking forward to exploring that with them a little bit more to see if it's something that they would even be able to entertain, whether they have the capacity or not to do something like that. And the other thing in a project like this, and the reason this type of project interests me, and the reason I know stuff about it is because when I worked for conservation nonprofits myself, I did projects like this. This is, we would find what you call a conservation buyer, and we as the land trust would work with the town. I did this in the town of Northborough, for instance, adjoining the Tugas farm, which is a pick your own operation. A lot of people know where Tugas is. There was a 20-something acre parcel abutting that farm, was set to be 9 house lots. We purchased it, sold an APR to the state, and then sold the underlying ownership of the property to the Tugas farm. It remained in agriculture. They retained 1 house lot for his son to build his house on. And it was a good outcome, good solution. And all the money came from either the state funding or from the private buyer, which was ultimately the farmer.
So the reason why I was asking my question, Brandon, is I hate to interrupt, but is exactly that, because I used to work right down the street from the Tugas farm. And so I know the area very well. And I had the experience in Littleton. And I'm just afraid that if we go to the Board of Selectmen with a recommendation to exercise right of first refusal based upon our 7 criteria, and we don't show them a pathway forward to be able to do that, that at $600,000, this thing is dead in the water.
I agree 100%.
Me too.
Great.
And so, I mean, and you can't do a conservation buyer project without a conservation buyer. Period. Full stop. And so, and in the timeline you need to put a project like this together, you basically need to know who that person is out of the gate. I've already started the process of trying to identify who that person is. So, this is a parcel of interest to people in that area. And there may be the potential to put together a buyer or a consortium of buyers locally who would be interested in serving in that role. And we should be able to know relatively soon whether or not that's viable or not. We have to know whether that's viable or not relatively soon in order to.
What's our timeline on this?
Well, you've got 120 days to act on the right of first refusal, and then you have 90 days to close.
So has anyone talked to the Flat Hill Orchard people about a lease back?
We're in the process of having those conversations.
Okay.
So all of that is to say is that, the town bought this right of first refusal by foregoing our property taxes on this parcel for a very long time. And so I think it's okay for the town to take some time to look at what its options are and not just rush to judgment on this. So my recommendation would be is that we pursue some of these options through these various channels to see if there's any there. And in the short amount of time that we've had at this point, we've had some conversations, some very good conversations, but I don't think we're at a point to be able to make a decision. So what I recommend we do is that we table a vote of a recommendation, and we convey to the Board of Selectmen that there are options that we are pursuing that would involve low or no investment of town monies to see that this gets permanently protected, or at least has a different outcome other than just completely plastered with houses. And please, Board of Selectmen, give us some space in order to have those conversations and commit to making a more fulsome recommendation at our next meeting.
And also the reasons why we want to do that,
Yes.
because it's in an ACEC, because it's prime agricultural soil, because it's a scenic road, it's the largest, intact agricultural operation in the town. I mean, that there are compelling reasons that I think we can tell them why we want more time to be able to help them put together a better deal that financially sees its way forward to the town being able to do something like this. Because otherwise they're going to look at, what am I going to get in the back taxes versus what am I going to pay out for this property? And from just a straight financial perspective, it's a no-brainer for them.
I agree.
I completely agree with this recommendation. Where are we at in the timeline now, Brandon?
Let's see, the notice was dated September 23rd. So this isn't stamped received. So I don't know when the town received it, but the town would have received it somewhere a day or two after September 23rd. So that started the clock, the 120-day clock.
Okay.
So we're only 21 days into the 120-day period. We had 100 days left.
Right.
Okay.
And there's been some conversations that have happened, behind the scenes with some players. And as I said, I've also reached out to the North County Land Trust, and so getting a few balls rolling in these first 21 days to see if there's any potential project here. And I am definitely one that doesn't like to stay on a sinking boat. So if there's not a project here, we should, I'm fully committed that I'll be ready to move on for sure. So I think, ultimately we may say, our recommendation to the Board of Selectmen is say, this meets at least three out of the 6 criteria, and leave the ultimate decision to the board. But, give them the information that they need.
So, Brandon, how long do you think we need to delay to explore the low-cost option?
Quite honestly, if we don't have enough information to know by our next meeting, then we don't have enough time to do anything.
So by our next meeting, the 24th.
Yeah.
So would you like a motion of some kind?
Well, I guess the motion would be to table the recommendation and to forward an explanation to the Board of Selectmen as to why we're asking for more time for this consideration.
So would you like a motion to recommend delaying a decision on this property until the Open Space Committee can fully explore a low-cost option to protect this extremely valuable farmland?
That sounds like a
It
great
meets
motion.
3 out of 6 criteria.
Second.
Okay,
Was that a motion, Sarah?
Yeah, that's a
Okay,
motion.
so a second.
okay, so we have a motion on the floor made by Sarah and seconded by Paula. Does anybody have any further comments or suggestions or questions or discussion? Hearing none, we'll take a roll call vote. Mike?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Karen?
Aye.
Paula?
Aye.
And chair is also aye. Thank you very much. And note that Bob had left the meeting and Lynn's not here. Great. I guess the last thing we have on the agenda is public comment. Is Chris listening in? Any comment, Chris?
I have no idea. I'm afraid.
Okay, I hear no further public comment. Any further comment from the board or committee?
Now,
Or
do you need
whatever the
any
heck that-
help? Do you need any help with the behind the scenes stuff on that property?
Yeah, let me have a couple of additional conversations and see if this thing starts forming up at all. And if it does, then yes.
If you need help, just, I'm happy to lend my assistance. I
Okay,
don't know very much, but I'm happy to lend my assistance.
super.
Brandon, this is Chris. I did have a public question, maybe.
Okay, sure. Go ahead, Chris.
So when certain properties are in 61B and are private, is there public access that's associated with that? Because I do see that in like Shirley lists a lot of their 61B private land, and it shows that there is public access. And I was wondering how to ascertain that.
Public access is not necessary for a Chapter 61B enrollment. And that's by statute. So 61B is open space. So it can have access, but places like golf courses that charge for you to go out and use their recreation can enroll in Chapter 61B. And that's not necessarily considered public access. And then open space purely for natural resource protection, habitat protection can be enrolled in 61B and no public access, and it still qualifies.
So do we have a situation where we know whether we have public access or not on the various 61B lands?
I believe, if I remember right, and now I'm going from memory, so while I'm talking, I'm going to try to look something up, but I believe the form that the landowner has to file on an annual basis, enrollment form, has a place where they have to describe whether public access is allowed. So I'm looking at the form right now.
On the
So
second
there's-
page, is the land open to the general public question
Yes,
on the
So-
61B form?
right. So if you're applying for recreation, the first question is the land substantially natural, wild, or open condition? Is the land in a landscaped or pasture condition or managed forest condition? Is the land primarily used for recreational use? If yes, indicate which recreational activity, archery, fishing, hiking, blah, 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 blah. And then is the land open to the general public? So you can check no there. So this is a form that Chapter 61B landowners have to file with the assessor on an annual basis. And so one could go through the most recent applications and see which parcels are considered open to the public. My guess is that a vast majority of them have no checked in that, and they still qualify.
Okay.
But if you're looking for a research project, Chris,
Where do you, is there somewhere you find those forms?
so again, the people who apply for Chapter 61B in town have to submit that form filled out annually every October to the Board of Assessors. So the assessors should have all of the forms, and I would assume that they're public records. So
Okay, thanks.
any further public comment? Motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion to adjourn at 8:08.
Second.
All those in favor, Paula,
Aye.
Karen,
Aye.
Sarah,
Aye.
Mike,
Aye.
and Chair is also an aye. Thank you all very much for sticking with it, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks.
All right, see ya.
Everybody.
See ya.
Bye.